Hare Krishna. I'm just out in the national park. The reception isn't so great, so I might have to turn my video off, but I'm here.
No problem. Hare Krishna, Bhagavat Prabhu. Please accept my humble obeisances. All Guru Srila Prabhupada.
Super Krishna, can you hear me?
Yep, I can. Yep.
Can you hear me, Super Krishna?
Yes, Prabhu, I can hear you. I made you co-host, so you can now share your screen. Hare Krishna, Shamananda Prabhu. Dandot Pranam Prabhu. Bhagavad
Can anyone
Prabhu,
hear
can
me?
you? Yeah, we all can hear you, Prabhu.
Can
We
anyone
can hear
hear
you.
me? I can't hear anyone. You can hear me, Seva, Devi?
Yes, we can hear, Prabhu.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hello? Idiot, I had my earphones in. Sorry, can everyone hear me now? Can I hear anyone?
Yes, we can hear you, Prabhu.
I
Yeah,
had
technology.
my earphones plugged in and I couldn't understand why no one could hear me.
Yeah.
Because everyone could hear me, but I couldn't hear them. How is everybody? Is everybody well?
Yes, very
Yes.
good. Thank you.
So we're all in lockdown now.
Oh my God, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Shamananda Prabhu, Hare Krishna. Anita, I can't see you. And
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Dandvat Pranam to you and to all other devotees. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
And Sara Ahmed.
Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Sara. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm here at the base of the Blue Mountains. So
Are
it's
you?
good to be joining you.
Wow, thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
You look
Thank you
like
for
you're in,
Vilasa invited me.
who did?
Vilasa.
Vilas.
Vilas.
Oh,
Vilas
Vilas
Mandir.
Manjari.
Yeah.
Ah, you're one of her people. You're one of Vilas Manjari's people.
Vilas
Very
Manjari,
nice.
Vilas Manjari followers.
Very nice. Are we expecting many more today?
Yeah, Prabhu, but let's start probably because what we want to do today from 8 to, first 1 hour we can have your class and then we can have question answers till 9:30. So it is not too long for anyone.
Yeah, I have another engagement today. I can't stay longer than 9:30 today.
Yeah, cool. Sounds good.
So only Sarah, I don't think you were here last week, but I think everyone else was. Yes, Anita, you were here last week, and Shaman,
Yeah, I was. Yes, I was here, Prabhu. I was here.
yeah, and Shamananda, you were here last week. No, you're new. Okay, Yogita and Seva Devi were here, and Subha Krishna. Okay. Does anyone have any questions from last week about what we dealt with last week? No? Okay. So we'll start with our invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Haribo. Gee, I hope I didn't put everybody off last week. Super Krishna.
Yeah, we had about
Quite a few more people last.
Yeah, we had 23 last time. So people will be joining probably. Today it was
Say that again.
Yeah, they should be joining soon. So
Indian Standard Time, they'll join.
yes. Yeah, IST. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, can I share screen? Am I able to share screen? Yes. So I'll
Yes, Prabhu, you can.
bring up the verse again. Where are we? Where is it? There. Okay, we're back. We're back where we were last week. We're on the third verse of the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. This beautiful verse. Nigama kalpataro galitam phalam sukmukad amritadrava samyutam pibita bhagavatam rasam alayam mahoraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful, although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. So, as I said last week, there's a lot here, and it would take us quite a few times on this verse to cover everything. I wanted to begin today by pointing out that these first three verses of Srimad Bhagavatam, let me just, I think we can look at them all together if we just get them up. Because these three verses, verses 1, 2, and 3, they constitute what is called the Mangala Charan of Srimad Bhagavatam. The Mangala means auspicious, and Mangala Charan, it means invocation or statement of auspiciousness. I might not have that completely right in definition, but the point I'm getting at is that the first three verses are spoken by Vyasadeva. Actually, we'll go through that in a minute, but a very important point I wanted to address was in regard to what is said in this verse. Nigama kalpatro galatam phalam sukha mukad amrita drava samyutam. Sukha mukad means spoken by Sukadeva Goswami. Srila Sukadeva Goswami, the original speaker of Srimad Bhagavatam. In one sense, that's not technically true, but I'll tell you why it's technically not true and why that statement is there. Beginning with these first three verses, we have, well, let's remember, Sukadeva Goswami is the son of Srila Vyasadeva. And Srila Vyasadeva is the compiler of the Vedic literature. When we say the compiler, we mean he wrote it down. He didn't compose it. He wrote it down, or he had it written down by Ganesh. And Ganesh agreed to become the scribe for Vyasadeva too. And Vyasadeva spoke the Srimad Bhagavatam, just as he spoke all of the Puranas and all of the Upanishads and so forth, the Mahabharata. He spoke it, and while he spoke it, Ganesh wrote it down. So the actual speaker of this Srimad Bhagavatam that we have here is Vyasadeva. And he speaks these three verses at the beginning, as I said, as Mangala Charan and as the invocation for auspiciousness. But what we should note here is that he has to do something very, very difficult for a sadhu to do. But and that appears in the second verse. If you can just bear with me, we're going to apparently beat around the bush for a little minute, but we're going to get to a very important point. So in the second verse of the first three verses, there's this statement by Vyasadeva about the Srimad Bhagavatam. He says, this beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. So he's speaking about himself there. He doesn't say, this Srimad Bhagavatam, this beautiful Bhagavatam, was compiled by me in my maturity. He refers to himself here in the third person. He says, the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity. Because it's not becoming for a great sage to say, I'm a great sage. But great sage is a very distinguished position amongst sages. It's not just that he's a sage, he's a great sage. He's a Mahamuni, as the verse, if you look at the word for word. Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite. Mahamuni Krite means the great sage. A Mahamuni is a great sage. And Krite means having compiled. So Mahamuni Krite, Srila Prabhupada translates for us as the great sage Vyasadeva having compiled. It was compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity. Now, in his maturity, that is revealed later in the Bhagavatam in chapter 5 as actually having compiled all the other Vedic literatures. He then compiled Srimad Bhagavatam. And why he did that is revealed later in chapter 5. But we need to understand the structure of the Bhagavatam right from the very beginning. And that's why I'm working on this point. Because as you may have noticed, in the third verse, it is said the original speaker of the Srimad Bhagavatam is Sukadeva Goswami. So I said that's technically not true, but it's an exhibition of the humility of Vyasadeva. He's exhibiting his humility here in that, in the second verse, he doesn't directly name himself as the compiler of the Bhagavatam, but he lets us know that this Srimad Bhagavatam was compiled by Mahamuni, by a Mahamuni. He, in one sense, he writes himself out of the picture. That is a symptom of his humility. And he spoke Srimad Bhagavatam to Sukadeva Goswami. Sukadeva Goswami heard the Srimad Bhagavatam from his father Vyas. But Vyas, as I said, writes himself out of the picture and says in the third verse that this Srimad Bhagavatam is originally spoken by Sukadeva Goswami. Where is that? Let's go back to that. Trying to juggle all this sometimes is a little difficult. O expert and thoughtful men, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desire tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Now, this brings up another point that we have to be very clear on in the structure of the Srimad Bhagavatam, because bear in mind what I've said. Vyasadeva spoke Srimad Bhagavatam to Sukadeva Goswami. In the second chapter, we learn a bit more about that, because immediately he heard the Srimad Bhagavatam from Vyasadeva, he left home. He just left. And we pick up Sukadeva Goswami later on again at the end of the first canto, and then in the beginning of the second canto, we have him speaking to Maharaj Pariksit. But what happens immediately after we read these 3 verses of the first chapter is that we jump to the point where we're at Naimisharanya. And this is the time, sometime exactly chronologically is never really presented in the Bhagavatam, because it's not like, Vyasadeva spoke Srimad Bhagavatam to Sukadeva Goswami on the 13th of August at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Bhagavatam doesn't work like that. But we learn, as we read the Bhagavatam, we learn that there is a sequence. And when we come to verse 4 of the first chapter, it begins, once in a holy place in the forest of Naimisharanya. It doesn't say when, it just says once. But we can know, as the Bhagavatam unfolds, as the presentation of the Bhagavatam is put before us, we learn to understand that this once is after the disappearance of Pariksit Maharaj. And maybe even later on. Just exactly when is it? At some time in the period after the disappearance of Pariksit Maharaj, there was a gathering of sages at Naimisharanya, and it's understood that they gathered there because they were very concerned about the appearance of the symptoms of Kali Yuga in the world. And they gathered at Naimisharanya to undertake a 1,000-year sacrifice for auspiciousness for the age of Kali. And they were headed by a personality called Shaunika Rishi, also another great sage. And this is a point about gatherings of devotees that we will also discuss at some length before we move on. But I want to stick on the path that we're on now. There are many. The nature of this subject is that practically every statement you make can lead you into a discussion of so many things. And we can, as the saying goes, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing I'm talking about here is how we are to understand what we're reading in terms of who's saying what to when and why, and how it all fits together in terms of the structure of this literature. So let's understand, therefore, that in terms of compiling what we're reading here, Vyasadeva is sitting with Ganesh, and he speaks these 3 verses that we have at the beginning. Then, from verse 4, Vyasa is also speaking to Ganesh, but he's immediately beginning to speak about the situation at Naimisharanya. He doesn't begin by speaking about Sukadeva Goswami speaking to Maharaj Pariksit, which is actually the Bhagavatam that the speaker of the Bhagavatam who is seated at Naimisharanya, and that's outlined in verses 4 to the end of the first chapter. The personality who speaks there is Sutta Goswami. Sutta Goswami is one of the sages assembled at Naimisharanya. And he was also present when Sukadeva Goswami spoke the Bhagavatam to Maharaj Pariksit. And he is going to speak the Bhagavatam again to the sages at Naimisharanya. And he begins speaking the Bhagavatam which Sukadeva Goswami spoke to Maharaj Pariksit in the 2nd canto. Now, then the first, and there are 19 chapters in the 1st canto. So let's just look at that now. All right, we have chapters 1 to 19. Now, you see, 19 is the appearance of Sukadeva Goswami. Everything that goes on from chapter 2 all the way to chapter 18 is basically Sutta Goswami's initial answers to the 6 questions that the sages at Naimisharanya posed to him in chapter 1. And in answering those questions, he gives a preamble as to how the Bhagavatam came into existence, what happened historically after Krishna's disappearance, up to the point where Maharaj Pariksit in chapter 18 is cursed by the Brahmin boy Srini. What's his name? Terrible with names. Who's the boy? Who's the Brahmin boy who? Anyway, we'll come back to that. That's a detail. So this is all spoken. Now let's go back. He asked it to Ganesh, and Ganesh is compiling it. But the importance of beginning with Sutta Goswami's speaking of the Bhagavatam is that this 3rd enunciation of Bhagavatam, which is what Sutta heard from Sukadeva, who heard it from us, is that this presentation of the Bhagavatam by Sutta Goswami is very specifically for us, for the residents of Kali Yuga. That's a very important point to understand. Because we see Vyasa speaks to Sukadeva Goswami. And the reason why that is because he will speak it to Parikshit Maharaj, so that Parikshit Maharaj can achieve the goal of life. It's a very, very intimate thing. Of course, there are many other sages there. Like we understand when Parikshit goes to the banks of the Ganges and asks the sages, what should you do when you're on the threshold of death? And there's a big debate goes on about who should speak to him, who's most qualified to speak. And then all of a sudden, Sukadeva arrives and everybody agrees by his symptoms, he should speak. So then he speaks. And the first question Parikshit asks is, what should one do when he is on the threshold of death? And it's very important because he knows he's on the threshold of death. And Krishna has arranged this whole situation. Very specific Maharaj Parikshit, because Maharaj Parikshit is in that pivotal position in terms of the transition from Kali Yuga, Dwapara Yuga to Kali Yuga after the disappearance of Lord Krishna. He's the emperor of the world who has to accommodate Kali. So there's all of that to be understood. But then, as I said, and Maharaj Parikshit has a glorious departure from the world because of his greatness. And also there's a period just after the end of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam where Parikshit Maharaj speaks to his mother, and from that we have the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which is channeled by Sanatana Goswami. So all of that is a chapter in the history of the Bhagavatam for very specific purposes. But we have these sages gathered at Naimisharanya, and they're very concerned by this time because Kali Yuga is really starting to manifest in the world. And they need direction. And they understand that there's a line, Vyasadeva, Sukadeva, and now Sutta Goswami. Because actually, by this time, Vyasadeva and Sukadeva are not available to the world. And the idea of the principle of parampara is also to be established by this step. Vyasadeva, Sukadeva, Sutta Goswami in the transmission of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Any questions? We're going to go into all of this in a lot of depth as we go forward and see the purpose of these next 17 chapters up until chapter 19. And then we'll segue from there into the second canto where Sukadeva begins to speak. Yes, Subha Krishna Prabhu.
Yeah, so in all reality, we consider that it is Shukadeva Goswami is the original speaker of Bhagavatam for all of us.
In the public sense, that's a fact.
Yeah, correct.
In the public sense, that's the point. The public sense of it is that the first time Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken in public after Srila Vyasadeva had compiled the original and spoken it to Sukadeva Goswami.
Yeah. Also, when I was listening to His Holiness Bhakti Charu Swami Maharaj, he said that, so Shukamukha Davya Samvitam is actually, Shukadev Goswami is explaining that it is the coming from the lotus mouth of Lord Krishna, basically through Vyasadev, and it is basically the um, um, beautiful words which are coming mixed with the saliva of uh, Krishna, mixed with it. So it is that pure, that sweet. It is, that's why it is so relishable.
Yeah, but that's another point. That's another point. We were discussing a different point. Yes, that's a fact, but I wasn't discussing that. I said, was there any questions about what I've been saying? We'll come back to that point. But I wanted everybody to understand what's happening here in terms of the structure of the book that we're reading.
I'm good.
Is everybody good with this? Yes?
Hare Krishna, can I ask one question, please? Hare Krishna.
Yes.
I'm just thinking, I'm a little bit wondering, originally, I'm
Is this you, Sunil?
Yes.
Sunil, are you asking a question?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. I want, I mean, if we're going to use the video, then
Okay.
I want to see you. Or we might as well just have a radio program.
Okay. So can I ask?
Yeah, go
Yes,
ahead, Prabhu. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So my question is, originally, Narad ji chastised to Vyasdev ji to propound the Bhagavatam for various reasons. Then why so many credit has been given to Sukhdev ji and to Sud Goswami and to other so literary people? Why not Bhagavatam was originally, as stated by Vyasdev ji, was not glorified as equal to Sukhdev ji and Sud Goswami and other speakers?
You weren't with us at the beginning, were you?
Sorry?
You weren't with us at the beginning of this class, were you?
I joined little late. Sorry for that. I joined little
So
late.
you missed what I said at the beginning.
Okay,
So
sorry.
that's all right. I'm not going to say any more about that now. You can look at the recording of this.
Okay. Thank
and
you.
see
Thank you. You're
what I
right.
said.
Thank you.
I don't want to offend anybody, but I want to say something very frankly right now. If you all turned up as late to Bhagavatam, to your work on a regular basis as you turn up late to the Bhagavatam class, you wouldn't have a job. And the most important thing in our lives as devotees is to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. And there's a kind of meme going around at the moment, which is very funny. It's that picture of Sukadev Goswami sitting naked, speaking to Maharaj Pariksit. And he's saying, somebody has their mobile on speaker. Could you turn it off, please? We need to all be very serious about the hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam. And part and parcel of that is you show up on time for the class. I showed up on time. So And like I say, I don't want to offend anybody, and I don't mean any offense, but there's something very powerful in the hearing of Srimad Bhagavatam when we hear it in a sangha of committed people. And commitment means showing up on time. Now, I appreciate we all have lives, things happen, we may become delayed, and so on and so forth. But it's just a point that I want to make, that it would be very helpful if we all came on time. I don't mean to offend you, Sunil. You may have been, I can appreciate that there may have been something happening in your life.
I'm very sorry, I do understand. Sorry, very sorry, I do understand. Next time I will be in time in the class. I understand. Thank you.
So much. And for me as the speaker, it would be very nice if I could see everybody. Because if we're going to do it on television, we might as well do it on television. Otherwise, we can just do it by radio. And I could just, I could just turn myself off and just speak, if that's the way we want to do it.
Okay.
Hello, Hare Krishna. So these are just a few little procedural points that I'd like to make. Because another thing that I find is that a lot of, I put sometimes I'll say, oh, excuse me, and I'll turn off my video because something's happening here and I have to deal with it. Now, I appreciate that.
Excuse me, Prabhu, you have disappeared.
Who said that?
Saver Davy.
David, yeah, I deliberately did it.
Yeah, can you come back on?
Here I am.
Thank you. It's nice to see you.
Nice to be here. Nice to see you.
You're back.
Radha Raman Das, and Radha. I've never met you. I don't know.
Radha Priya Mataji.
I don't know who you are. Hare Krishna. How are you? Because another thing that I've found is that we can become a bit sloppy in our hearing with this format, because I can turn myself off and be listening or speaking, but you don't know what I'm doing. I could be rolling chapatis here, or I could gather my knitting and I could be knitting while I'm talking, or I could be doing or I could be checking on my accounts or something. But everything works best. There's a saying, energy flows where attention goes. And Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to be heard and spoken with total focus. Total focus. Not that I'm saying this from any kind of conceit. I know, most of you could probably tune in somewhere else and hear the Srimad Bhagavatam from somebody much more qualified than me. But the fact is, I've been asked to do this, and you've all voluntarily come. So my request is that we come on time and we give it all of our attention. There's so many things in this world which are there to distract us. There are endless distractions, and there will be. There's somebody waiting to get here? Can I let them in? There we
Yep.
are. There are endless distractions. This whole world is a distraction. We came down the rabbit hole of the material world, and we have been ceaselessly distracted by material phenomena since time immemorial. That's the reality of our situation. And right now we are very deep down the rabbit hole of Kali Yuga and going deeper. And the only way out, going back to the second verse of this beautiful Bhagavatam, is the Bhagavatam, as verse 6. I'll just bring that up again and we'll get back on with this. I'm sorry if my words are harsh or offensive to anybody. They're not meant to be. It's actually a request more than anything, because as we see here, second verse of the Bhagavatam makes a very powerful statement. As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. That's a fact. That's not hyperbole. That's not rhetorical, poetic, flowery words. That's a fact. That's a fact. That simply by hearing this Srimad Bhagavatam with attention and submission, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. And actually, that occurs at the very first hearing, the very first attentive and submissive hearing of the Bhagavatam establishes that as an irrevocable fact. This is one of the reasons why Srila Prabhupada used to say, be careful. Be careful with this Krishna consciousness. This is Krishna. Everything about this Krishna consciousness movement is Krishna. And just like in the material world, there are certain drugs that it is said you don't touch them, because the instant you touch them, you're addicted to them. Or just like Prabhupada says, everything is understood by its characteristics. And he says, just like potassium cyanide, when you read the characteristics of potassium cyanide, there's no description of the taste of potassium cyanide, because instantly, if you taste potassium cyanide, you die. So what Srila Vyasadeva is saying here is an irrevocable fact. It's a truth. It's an immutable truth that as soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam by this culture of knowledge, and that culture is holographic in the sense that you take one grain of rice from a pot and squeeze it, and if it's cooked, you know the whole pot is cooked. So as soon as you attentively and submissively hear the message of Bhagavatam, the culture of that knowledge is instantaneous, and Krishna is immediately established within your heart. Your awareness of Krishna is immediately established. Of course, we understand Krishna is in your heart. But the fact that he is established within your heart is an irrevocable fact, and it's immediate. So therefore, just like in the writings of Rupa Goswami, there's the verse that with one gopi says to another, if you're in any way to Vamsivat and look on the beautiful face of Govinda, because you're finished if you do that. Your material life is finished. That's a fact. And actually, the whole idea that's presented in Christianity and in Islam is that no one has looked on the face of the Lord and lived is actually an abridgment of that statement of Rupa Goswami, that no one can look on the face of the Lord and continue living ordinary life in the ordinary way. Bhagavatam is so powerful because, as we read last week, this is the literary incarnation of the Lord. As soon as you touch Srimad Bhagavatam through the ear, by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, or even just, as we say, just keep it on the shelf in your house, touch it, see it, your material life is finished. And it's actually instantaneous. The moment you contact Srimad Bhagavatam, your material life is finished. It may not externally appear so, but that's just external. Srimad Bhagavatam changes you from inside out because it goes to the core of the matter. It goes to the reality that Vasudeva Savamiti, that everything, Samahatma Sudulava, we have been catapulted. We've been thrust into this most upper echelon of knowledge simply by contacting Srimad Bhagavatam. We cannot underestimate this. There is no underestimation of it, and there is no overestimation of it. You cannot overestimate what is being said here. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated. Now, something I wanted to talk about this week as well is there in that statement. So let's go back to what I wanted to talk about. These three verses say so much, they say so much. But this point of completely rejecting all religious activities that are materially motivated, if we look at the Sanskrit of that, the word is dharma. No, leave it. The word is dharma, and Prabhupada describes it as religiosity. We have to understand, actually, religiosity is just a part of dharma. That's a very major discussion. And we have to understand that Srila Prabhupada was faced with a very difficult situation in presenting Srimad Bhagavatam to the 20th century English-speaking world, because a strict definition of dharma would not have carried, because nobody very much at all knew anything about dharma and its meaning. And in the introduction to Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada deals with this point. And if you can read between the lines of what he's saying, you'll understand that he says the word religion is the nearest thing to a description of dharma in the English language. But actually, to call this simply your religion is way, way short of the inner depth of meaning of Dharma. Dharma involves religiosity, but we have so many kinds of Dharma which are related to tattva. Tattva, translated to truth. Tattva means basically the thisness of that. Tat means that. Tattva. So we have Bhagavat Tattva, the truth regarding the nature of Bhagavan. So here we have Dhamma Projita Kaitavotra Paramo Nirmasaranam Satam. All Dharma which relates to fruitive intention. And that means really the Vedas. If you understand that from the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna that the Vedas deal mainly with the three modes of material nature. You have to become transcendental to those. And that's the essence of what is being said here, that the Srimad Bhagavatam begins on and stays on the transcendental platform. And it's to do with the Dharma of the soul, the Sanatan Dharma of the soul, the occupation of the soul in transcendent reality, not in relative material reality. Okay, any questions? Or carry on? Okay, so these three verses set the situation up for us to actually then begin hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam with the correct mentality. So no matter how far you go into Srimad Bhagavatam in your reading of it, never stray, my advice, never stray too far away from a study of these three verses to keep yourself on track as to what you're doing in the study of Srimad Bhagavatam. Five to 9. Are there any questions? I can open it up. You don't have to particularly ask a question about the things that I've said, but if you have any questions about these verses and about the Bhagavatam, we can open up for that now if you want. Otherwise, yes, sir.
Prabhu, you were talking about dharma. So is that dharma similar to the dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, the four religiosity principles?
That's a very good question. That leads into actually, there's a very, very deep discussion of the various applications of the word dharma. In terms of the four principles of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, the dharma that is being described there is Vedic dharma, the dharma of action for the human being that we find in the Vedas. Because you see, dharma for what? Economic development and sense gratification. And that's described in the second chapter where Krishna, of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna deals with and actually dispenses with the Vedas. That begins actually in verse 39 of the second chapter. Between verses 39 and 53, you can look and read that. Krishna deals with how we have to actually come to the transcendental platform of Dharma. Because Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha becomes a tautology if you stick simply within the purview of Vedic Dharma, or the Dharma of the Vedas. The Dharma of the Vedas leads to material artha, economic developments, and then it leads to sense gratification. And that can lead you into any kind of situation in the higher planetary systems or on this planet. But ultimately, it will lead you to a point where you become dissatisfied. And then you seek liberation. But the only liberation you'll find within that kind of Dharma is impersonal liberation. And impersonal liberation doesn't last, and you'll come back down to dharmic activities in the material world. And then around and around you go. And unfortunately, in dharmic, Vedic dharmic culture, as Krishna says in verses 42 and 43, people who follow all the flowery words of the Vedas, which lead to resultant good birth and wealth and so on and so forth, think that there's nothing more than that. Think that there's nothing more than that. And as a result of that, because of their attachment to Bhoga Aishvarya Prashaktanam, because they're attached to Bhoga and Aishvarya, sense gratification and material opulences, they practice these dharmas, and they're not only attached to these things, they're bewildered by these things. Prashaktana, they are bewildered by these things. And therefore, vyavasa yatmika buddhi, they don't develop samadha vidhi, they do not develop the firm determination to perform devotional service. And devotional service begins with Shravanam Kirtanam, Vishnu, by hearing and chanting directly and exclusively about Vishnu, not about demigods or anything like that. So that firm determination doesn't come while one is practicing the Dharma of the Vedas. One must, therefore, Krishna says, Vishaya, Trigunya Vishaya Veda. The Veda, Trigunya, deals with the Vishaya that arises from contact with the three modes of material nature, living within the three modes of material nature. And then he says, Nistrigunya Bhavajuna. You must become transcendental to these three modes. Then he goes on to give the example of how one who, just as all the purposes of a small pond are served by a reservoir of water, a large reservoir of water, then one who understands the purpose behind the Vedas can actually progress. So that understand what is behind the Vedas, the purpose of the Vedas, brings one then, or wanting to know, there's got to be more than this. This Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. It's just a cycle you get stuck in. And at some point, somebody wants to know there's got to be more than this. Then Krishna, who is the supersoul within the heart of every living entity and who's satisfying the desires of everyone one way or another, according to those desires. When he sees that within your heart, there is a sincere and consistent desire to know there's got to be something more than this, I'm fed up with this. Is this all there is? And that's what happens. Eventually, and it may take billions of creations for this situation to come about, one comes to the situation where Krishna says, Bahunam janmanam ante jnanavam mam prapajate. One becomes a jnanavan. One becomes fully aware of all of the energies and how they work and how to work with them in the material world. That makes one a jnanavan. But then one comes in contact because one still wants to know more. Because, as Prabhupada explains, the sum total of material knowledge and material activities is ultimately a perplexing thing for the soul, for the living entity. Because the living entity ultimately wants to be free. And the most intelligent amongst human beings come to the understanding that whatever I do here, I'm not free. Because one thing leads to another in terms of cause and effect, and I'm just continually in here. And I don't want this anymore. Bahunam janmanam ante. After many births, Bahunam janmanam ante. That means practically countless lifetimes. One comes to the situation where one sincerely and consistently wants to know there's got to be more than this. Then one is ready to come to the situation where one can begin to hear from transcendental sources, from authoritative transcendentalists. And that's where one becomes able to hear the highest truth. The highest truth, as it says at the beginning of the Bhagavatam, is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. So that brings us to the point where we, by hearing Bhagavad Gita, we can come to understand what Krishna is talking about when he says, Sarva dharman parityajya, mamekam sharanam vraja. Now, Krishna sees the consistent and sincere desire within the heart of the sincere seeker of truth, the sincere seeker of truth. And he then brings you in contact with the pure devotee of the Lord. He brings you in contact with a Mahamuni, with the greatest transcendentalist, the Bhakti Yogi. And then you can put your questions to that person and hear from that person. And that begins with Dharma Projita Kaitavotra. You've kicked out all other material dharmas, all dharmas that are materially motivated. And all you want to hear is the truth of my existence. Just like we see with Sanatana Goswami. When he bows down to Lord Chaitanya, he says, everybody calls me a learned man. But to tell you truthfully, sir, I don't know who I am. And you may know everything else, but if you don't know who you are, what's the use of your knowledge? Because ultimately, we all want to know, what about me? What am I for? What is the purpose of my life? And one has to become completely sick, disgusted, Prabhupada says, disgusted with all the dharmas and adharmas that give us bhoga and aishwarya, give us sense gratification and material opulence. And that's very beautifully illustrated by Mother Devahuti in the 3rd canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, when she surrenders to Kapila Deva. You read those, there's 5 verses there. You can all read them at your leisure. When Mother Devahuti approaches Lord Kapila Deva to be her spiritual master, and she begins by saying, I am sick of the disturbance that is coming from my senses. I am sick of this. And until one is heartily and thoroughly sick and disgusted, then one will be trapped in the cycle of mundane dharmas and adharmas. It's not, you cannot have adharma without dharma. And you cannot have dharma without adharma in the material world. So adharma is also sequential and consequential. It's not that if you don't follow dharma, it's just chaos, because there's a very nice verse in the 5th chapter, verse 15 of the Bhagavad Gita, the 15th verse purport explains, there's verses there from one from Mahabharata, and I can't remember where the other one is from, that explains actually that just as the wind blows a cloud from one place to another, if you want to go to hell, then Krishna will take you there. He'll show you the way. He'll give you the adharmic path that will lead you to hell, according to your desire. So Bhagavatam is all about, or is all for the person who's fed up with dharma and therefore fed up with adharma and wants to just get out of this situation of the material world. That's why it said, be careful, because if you want to maintain material life, then go and do it. But don't try to maintain it and at the same time cultivate Krishna consciousness. It doesn't work. Prabhupada said it's like lighting a fire and pouring water on it at the same time. But it's a gradual process. But that just lends more weight to what I said at the beginning. This process is so powerful that right in the first contact, the first blow, so to speak, knocks out the core of the problem. And then we're just dealing with vestiges of a material life. We're just dealing with the vestiges. It's like Prabhupada says, you pull the plug on the fan, it slows, it doesn't stop immediately, but you've taken the juice out, you've taken the current out, that what makes it turn, so it slows down and then stops. So we remain in the material world after we hear the Srimad Bhagavatam and we begin to live Bhagavat Dharma. We're still in the material world. The vestiges of our material existence are there. Our parabdha karma, our manifest karma still exists. We still are in this body. We do have to live out this lifetime, and so on and so forth. But when one comes in contact with that knowledge by which nescience is destroyed, we go on in that 5th chapter, verses 16 and 17. When one is enlightened with that knowledge by which ignorance is destroyed, then one's knowledge lights up everything like the sun lights up the day. That knowledge by which nescience is destroyed is Bhagavat Dharma, Srimad Bhagavatam. contact with, as it says on the back to Godhead magazine, nescience is, Godhead is light, nescience is dark. Where there is Godhead, there is no darkness. It's like that. But then, just like with Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna surrenders to Krishna, then the battle begins. So similarly, when we become enlightened with knowledge, then the next verse is very important. Tadatmanas tan buddhayas tanishtas tat parayanaha. One's knowledge, one's intelligence, mind, faith, and refuge. That is our work then. Our intelligence, our mind, our faith, and our refuge have to become fixed on Krishna, in Krishna. And gradually, all of the world, we always doubt whether this is true, because we're still in this phenomenal world. Our senses have to deal with the world still. And the whole purpose of the material world is to distract us, delude us, create doubts and fears. So therefore, we have to become fixed in hearing the truth, fixed in it. And then gradually and proportionately, our deep-seated desire to control and enjoy the material energy will die. Actually, it's already dead by contact with Bhagavatam. But just like you see, there's twitching and whatever in the subtle body due to the long association with the three modes of material nature. And in the mind and the intelligence and the false ego are becoming purified. So then we're in the process of anatta nivritti for a very long time. All of the unwanted things have to be voided out. But then as we read on, and this is why I'm coming back to my original point, these first chapters now are very important. Chapter 2, as we move into chapter 2, where Sutta Goswami begins answering the 6 questions that are asked in the first chapter. He makes so many powerful statements about the process of hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. And the most important verse in that regard to what we're saying here today is the verse Shrinvatam Swa Kata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridyanta Sto Hyabadrani Vidunoti Surit Satam. Krishna is Surit. Krishna is the super soul, the Paramatma within the heart of every living entity. And he cleanses away the desire, the root desire, to which all other desires for material enjoyment are attached. Krishna cleanses away the desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the truthful devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which in themselves are virtuous when properly heard and chanted. And the word used there is vidunoti, surit satam, the second half of the verse. Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtana hridyanta hyabadrani. Abhadra means all of the inauspicious things, anartas, inauspicious things. Hridyanta sto hybadra, hridyanta, the heart is full of dirty things, but at the core of the heart is Krishna. We're separated from that understanding by all these dirty things. Krishna is within the heart, and he reciprocates with what? He reciprocates with your vidhunoti. Vidhunoti is a very important word. It means to cleanse by sound. The powers of sound are inestimable. And actually, I think some of you may have heard me say this before. Swami. Did anybody ever encounter him when he visited Australia? Anyway, Mahavishnu Goswami was a very wise man, and he explained to me one time that still today in India, vinotis. There's two. There's the macro and the micro vidunoti. Still today, especially in Calcutta, in the suburbs of Calcutta, you can find people going around and they have this strange looking musical instrument. And it's just an L shape with one string. It's called a vidunoti. And these people go around and they make their call, and people bring out their cotton mattresses. Now, anyone who's slept on a cotton mattress, like a futon or whatever, any length of time, you realize the more you sleep on that thing, the more compressed it becomes. The cotton compresses. So these people bring out their mattress, and the mattress, they set up this thing so that it's like that, the short end there and the long end there. And then there's this string, and they feed the mattress under the string, and they pluck the string, and it twang, 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 twang. And as it vibrates, hitting the mattress, it causes the cotton. And what comes out is something this thick, goes away something this thick, because it's all puffed up again. Because the sound of that thing causes the fibers of the cotton to expand. That's the micro. The macros is big sheds that you see where cotton fields are. These big sheds are called vidunotis. They have a false floor, like chicken wire floor. And through the shed, there's a huge bow, like the bow that Lord Ram smashed, Lord Shiva's bow. This huge bow goes and and there's a very strong cord, like strung on that bow. And as I said, parts of it extend beyond the shed. Now, people go out and they pick the cotton balls off the cotton plants. And cotton plants, the cotton comes as a flower and then quite a hard shell. And then that cracks open and there's a ball of cotton there. And so this is growing and it's out in the fields, it's dusty, and there may be insects there, maybe even vestiges of that hard shell still connected when they pluck that cotton ball off. So all those cotton balls, people, they pluck them and they put them in bags on their back. Then those bagfuls of those cotton balls are brought to this big shed and they're put in, and the shed is stuffed. Well, not completely stuffed, because I'll tell you why in a minute. But at a certain point, they say, all right, that's enough. But it goes up to the point at least where this strong cord on the bow is going through this pile of cotton balls. Then they get people at each end of that thing, and somebody calls a raga, and they start playing out the raga by beating this cord. And it sets up a vibration. through the whole shed. And that sound vibration goes out amongst the cotton, and it causes all the dead insects and all the dust and all the other, anything that's not cotton begins to precipitate and go down through and eventually falls through the floor at the bottom. And the expert person who's calling all that raga, and eventually you say, now open the doors of the shed, and there's a big fluffy ball of clean white cotton. Vidunoti, cleansing by sound. What? Abhadrani, Hridyanta Astohya Bhadrani. Hridyanta, things that have become established, the dirty things that have become established within our hearts, become cleansed away by this vidunoti, this hearing the transcendental sound vibration. Very scientific. Very scientific. And this is Bhagavat Dharma. Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna. Bhagavat Dharma. Hearing Krishna over and over and over and over and over. Because the other point about life is full of repetition. And actually, what we hear shapes us. There's a quote here by that we're using in a Vaisheshika book, is writing a very nice book about mantra meditation. I'm going to be privileged here because we're going to look at something that not many people are seeing yet. Has a quote from Lao Tzu, which gives a very nice outline. Now, I hope I can find it. I can't find it. Oh, it's further down. Sorry. Just bear with me a minute. Lao Tzu says, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. So what we think about is based upon what we hear. So what we are working on in this book is to add that dimension to what he's saying here. It all begins with what you hear. So we have to be very careful what we hear. We have to become selective about what we hear. Because we will be hearing over and over and over again anyway, every day. So it's very important to understand these principles and understand that this is Dharma Project Kaitavoltra. This is the Dharma that begins by kicking out everything and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, which propounds the highest truth, which is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. The reality is, the eternal reality is that we are all actually lovers of Krishna. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sajja Kabulnoi. Nitya Siddha means eternally established. Krishna Prema means love of Krishna. This is not something that has to be gotten from somewhere else. This is something that is within us. Therefore, I say this point, this first contact with Bhagavatam actually punctures the core or the kernel that is developed around the core of the heart and puts us in contact with reality. Then all we have to do is just keep hearing about it, and everything becomes manifest to us from within out. Is that all right, Rasananda Prabhu?
Yes, Prabhu. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Sarva Dhamman Parityaja, Dhamma Kaitavo Tra, Dhamma Projita Kaitavo Tra. They're the same thing. And the speed at which it happens, giving up all other religions, kicking all other dharmas, kicking out all other dharmas, and just becoming fixed in Sanatana Dharma is in our hands. It's in our hands. Because we always have to choose, and it's a constant thing. We're in Devi Dham. We're in the realm of Maya. Daily, it's a decision. Am I going to listen to Maya? Am I going to be absorbed in Maya, or am I going to be absorbed in Krishna? Every day. Therefore, Krishna says, Chaitasa Savakamani, in all activities. Chaitasa Savakamani, Matpara, what is it? Chaitasa Savakamani, Mai Sanyasya Matpara. You just depend upon me in all activities. Just depend upon me. It's a practice. And that's why we must do it in Sangha, because united we will stand and divided we will fall. And that is Maya's business, to separate one from another. And then, just like the wolf pack, they separate the sick or the young and defenseless from the herd of sheep, and they kill them. And just don't be any doubt, Maya will kill you. She's been killing you over and over again. We've all been killed and killed and killed by this material energy over and over again. But if we remain united in this process of Bhagavat Dharma, based upon this hearing and chanting together, then there is no danger. There is no danger. Okay, that's 9:30. We got to stop at 9:30 or 9:45. What do you think, Subha Krishna?
Up to you, Prabhu.
Well, I can do another.
9:30. If devotees are happy to stay at 9:45, we can.
Well, that's what we did last week, didn't we? If you wanted to leave at 9:30, you could leave. If you wanted to stay till 9:45, you could, or 10. But I've definitely got to finish at 1:45 today. I've got another appointment at 10 and then one at 11. Sure. So I've got a busy morning. So if you want to leave now for family purposes, you can. And my wife's saying here in the background, actually, I don't think I've got another 15 minutes, maybe another 5. 10. She says 10 minutes.
You're getting a remote control.
Are there any more questions or any comments? Sorry?
Remote control.
Yeah, I'm under my remote control. Well, you know, every man's controlled by his wife. You know the story? There's the story.
That's a tattva, Prabhu.
Sorry?
That's the tattva, truth.
That's another, well, we only speak eternal truth here, so.
But it's a man saying it and you can't just politician.
Yes, you're right. There's this story.
That is a Vivaha Tattva.
Vivaha Tattva. Where Birbal said to Akbar, because Akbar was complaining about how his wife was nagging him. And this is the emperor. And he's complaining to Birbal. He said, my wife's always on my case about this and that. And Birbal said, well, every man's controlled by his wife. And Akbar said, that can't be true. That every man? And Birbal said, yeah. He said, Akbar said, I don't agree with that. So Birbal no. And then overnight, he had people go out and enlist 1,000 men to show up the next day in the courtyard of the palace in the morning. Yes. And he went to see Akbar and he said, Your Majesty, can you come out on the balcony? I want to illustrate to you how every man is controlled by his wife. I've got a sample here, 1,000 men from all over Agra. And I'll prove to you that every man, if we consider that that's a what do they call it? A demonstrative sample, I'll prove to you that every man's controlled by his wife. So Akbar came out with him on the balcony, and in the courtyard, Birbal had a line drawn down the center, and he had all 1,000 men on one side of the line. And he said, gentlemen, man who is, please go to the other side of the line. So they all started going across. 999 men went across, and then one little man was just standing right at the back. And Akbar says, see, you're wrong. Not every man's controlled by his wife. And Birbal said, wait. And he stepped up and he said to the man, he said, sir, I see when I said every man who's controlled by his wife should go to the other side of the line, you didn't move. And then the man said, yes, I know so. Oh. And then Birbal said, well, why was that? And the man said, well, because my wife told me not to follow the crowd. So there you have it. I've got 10 minutes. So if we want anybody else have any questions or comments they want to make today? I want to apologize again. Sunil's gone, and I think I might have upset him. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude or insulting to anybody. I have a coarse and rough and rowdy ways. So, but I hope no one was upset. Because if they were upset, my wife would be very angry with me. So.
Not at all. But we need to have some discipline, some order for Bhagavatam, and you are absolutely right. Everyone should turn up on time.
This is a sacred space and a sacred time, the most sacred space, dealing with the most sacred subject, the absolute truth, the supreme personality of Godhead. This is the big issue. Srimad Bhagavatam deals with the theology of God as a person. And you will not get this information anywhere else. And it's not, that brings us back to the thing about Dharma and religion. This is not just our religion, as opposed to just our beliefs, as opposed to somebody else's beliefs. This is scientific knowledge. This is scientific knowledge. It's not sectarian. It is the highest reality is the highest truth is reality, distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. And we are the most fortunate people we're able to hear this and imbibe this and live our lives according to this knowledge. I just thought of that old song. There's an old Beatles song that says that back in the USSR, and there's a line that says, you don't know how lucky you are, boy. Back in the US, back in the US. back in the USSR. We don't know how lucky we are back here now, coming back to this. And that is what is happening. We are coming back to reality. It's not that illusion is our natural situation. Just like where there is Godhead, there is light. Where there is nescience, there is no light. What is it? Godhead is light, nescience is darkness. Where there is Godhead, nescience, sorry. Where there is Godhead, Godhead is light, nescience is darkness. Where there is Godhead, there is no darkness. It's not that out of illusion comes reality. It's not that out of the darkness comes light. If you've got two rooms next to each other, and this room has the light on, and this room has no light on, and you open the door, it's not that the darkness floods into the room with light. The light in the room floods into the room with no light. So we don't know how, we got to be aware of how lucky we are. We've got to be, by taking this knowledge and trying to give it to somebody else, especially people who don't have it. And then you become very dear to Krishna. As he says, there's no one more dear, and there will never be one more dear in this world than the one who delivers this message.
Correct.
Bhagavat Ashraya.
Yes.
Yes. I just popped the words to United We Stand in the chat for everyone, and I think it's really pertinent. You could relate it very much to Krishna and the Sangha.
Wow. Good realization.
There's nowhere in the world that I would rather be than with you, my love. And there's nothing in the world that I would rather see than your smile, my love. For united we stand, divided we fall. And if our backs should ever be against the wall, we'll be together, you and I. For united we stand, and divided we fall. And if our backs should ever be against the wall, we'll be together, you and I. And if the world about you falls apart, my love, then I'll still be here. And if the going gets too hard along the way, just you call, I'll hear. Brilliant.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful. Beautiful. And that's what it's all about. I gotta go.
Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you all so much for coming and stayed. Once again, I apologize for any offense. And I pray that the Lord will protect you all and keep you from all harm. And somehow or another, we'll find our way back to this place and this space and this time. And we'll dive into Srimad Bhagavatam again together. Okay?
Thank you.
Srimad Bhagavatam ki
Jai.
Jai.
Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
His Grace Bhagavat Ashraya Prabhu ki
Jai.
Gaur Premanande.
Hari Bol.
Hari Bol. Thank you.